Hello. Today I'll be reviewing my 2024 analysis of WebRTC on GitHub. Maybe to start, we can just introduce ourselves. So, Chad Hart, hopefully you know who I am since I invited you all here, or you saw this somehow, but yeah, editor over at WebRTCHacks, engineering director, Ring Central, do other stuff. And because I hate talking to myself, I invited Tsahi here. One, he always has great commentary, which I'm sure will interject. But it's nice to be able to talk to somebody. Actually, I haven't talked to Tsahi in a while, so it's good to have you here. But Tsahi, you want to give a real brief introduction to yourself? Not that
I'm
needed.
Tsahi Levant-Levi of blog QUIC. I'm here as Chad's psychiatrist today.
Yeah, thank you.
He's going to talk to me.
So yeah, just make me feel good.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So are we doing also questions, by the way?
There are, so yeah, there's a Q&A here. I one reason I like this is I'll bring people on stage and they want to come up and ask questions live. It's more fun that way. So yeah, we can do that. But if there's questions along the way, there is a Q&A tab. And sorry, I wasn't expecting you to do much, but actually maybe that's something you could look at if there's some questions or you want to interject it there. I might
ask a lot of questions, so I have something to do.
Okay. This is a relatively new piece of software that I'm also trying to test, so yeah, I guess bear with me with it. Okay, well, let's get into it today. I'm going to try to do this in like less than 30 minutes. It's very easy for me to spend more, so I'll try to be fast in some spots. But anyway, what are we doing here? I'll cover that first. We'll get into some general health trends. We'll talk about top repos, orgs, who the big contributors are in WebRTC, and then I did some analysis looking at different WebRTC plus different technology trends to see how things, how things are shaping out and what's interesting in the world of WebRTC, which I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about. Well, today we'll just stick mostly to the data. So maybe to start out, what are we doing here? I started back in 2015. I noticed that Google BigQuery published basically all the GitHub data, or published all GitHub commits there, and I thought it'd be interesting. Oh, can we go mine that data to see and look for trends in WebRTC? So that's kind of when I started this, and I've been maintaining and improving this methodology since then, of just basically going through the GitHub data and looking to see what's interesting, who's the best, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that sort of thing. And maybe a little bit more on that topic. So the core of my methodology is when I'm using this BigQuery Google, or the BigQuery GitHub commit database, right? Colab is another nice tool they use because you can actually run queries. You have BigQuery magics, they call it, in Colab to run your queries there. I use this mostly as a notebook to kind of keep track of what I'm doing as I go along and write notes and do analysis. That's what Colab's good for. And then you'll see here, to make pretty charts, there's nothing better in my mind than Excel. So I usually dump the stuff in Excel and make a lot of the graphs here. And I guess just in terms of like, all right, what is this data? And I think this is important, right? I mean, in the ideal world, I can go through and search all the source code on GitHub and do a bunch of analysis there, right? But that's like way too big. So, and not really available, right? So that's not practical or possible today. But we do have this basically events database, right? Which has all the events that come out of GitHub here, right? So we do some analysis based on the different types of events you can see here. And then within those events, they're usually a lot of information. So within those events, I mine for keywords, right? And the hard part is finding distinct keywords that don't get overlapped or don't mean something else, but that's a lot of what I've done over time. What really takes forever is the least fun part of this, is actually going through and like cleaning out all the anomalies and fixing all the stuff in there. But I guess that's part of general data science, anything unusual there. But the benefit is I've been doing this over the years, so it's gotten a little bit better, So with that, let's dive into some of the big WebRTC trends. And to start out, I mean, one, I don't know if I probably don't need to remind anybody, but the pandemic ended out there. Things are maybe not quite the same as before. And this chart here shows the number of, and again, keep in mind, these are all kind of unique counts per month, right? So you can have one user that has like a lot of activity in a given month, like they're only going to show up once, right? So it helps to normalize some of that. And I didn't mention earlier, but I also rip out the bots really mess stuff up. There's a lot of bots out there. I try to take them out of the data set. But you can see here, obviously, if you look at the total number of GitHub users that have done something WebRTC related, that peaked during the pandemic. But you can see actually we're not doing too shabby here. Actually, earlier in March, we had some new peaks in there, and the numbers are roughly around the same towards the end here. So I said in general we're doing okay. I mean, I don't know if you agree. I mean, you got a lot of clients, you do a lot of stuff, customers in WebRTC. Is this meet with your understanding, Tsahi?
I think when I look at things, I look at the usage, less at the developers. And in the usage, you've seen that we had a growth of 4 times the use of WebRTC between before the pandemic to after the pandemic, if you remove all of the noise in the middle of the pandemic. And it seems almost the same.
Okay.
The number of repos jumped by a factor of 2. It stayed, which makes sense. And then the number of users grew by a factor of 2.5 and then went down to 1.5 or 2, somewhere in between that. So it seems in line.
Yeah. So I also analyze the code based on type of activity. So looking at coding events where people are actually doing pushes, PR reviews, right? And then I have what I call leecher events, which are basically not code events. People who aren't necessarily contributing code to repos but are still using those. And you can see, I mean, there's still a steady trend up there. Popularity marks, I think, have kind of run flat. They haven't gone down. There, it's mostly flat. But well, my conversion here got messed up. But you can see actually there was a new. If you look at code events, actually we had a new peak also in March, right? Which I think actually is pretty interesting. It hasn't gone down a whole lot. So even though WebRTC is definitely a maturing technology, people know what it is, you still see a lot of activity and growth. And we'll get into that a little bit more as I go through some of the repo analysis on some of the new things that are going on. But to me, this is encouraging, right? That we still, we still kind of have new peaks. There hasn't been a big drop off. I mean, at some point that's going to happen, right? At some point, WebRTC gets boring. It's not going to be, so active with new stuff. But we're not there yet. And if we look here, this is, I guess, another view of the same thing, right? Distinct users that had some sort of coding event. And this is higher than ever, actually, if you look at this. So higher than even during the pandemic times. So not too bad.
How do you explain it?
Well, there actually are. I'll get into a little bit, but I mean, there's a lot of people are doing new stuff with WebRTC that they weren't before.
Okay.
We'll talk about, like, we'll get to WHIP and WHEP and stuff like that. But
And
as a subset, but I mean, as WebRTC and broadcasting tools, WebRTC and things like OBS for the first time, like that's like helping it's expanding to new communities where it didn't exist before.
I have a nagging question that I'm sure others have, at least those with an OCD. What happened in October 2021?
Oh, yeah, let me, well, it's in every graph. There's an example where, for whatever reason, the volumes were like half of what they were supposed to be, and it didn't make any sense, so I just excluded that whole month.
Okay.
I also say this current October, I didn't have time to fully investigate it. Like, I didn't see anything obvious there, but like this current October is down, and that's unusual because usually October is one of the busier, the seasonality wise. October is usually one of the busier months, but this was down for whatever reason, a little bit low. But yeah, that's why there's a hole there.
Okay.
I also took a look, I talked about, coding and leacher events, and no surprise during the pandemic, a lot of people coming on just like they want to use WebRTC. They didn't know anything about it, weren't contributing. The positive thing here is like actually now the coder events and leacher events have flipped, right? There's more people contributing code than just passively using these repos. That's also a good sign of health too, right? We have, effectively we have more WebRTC developers, active developers now than ever. People actually pushing code. So, all right, this next section, I'm going to talk through some of the top repos, top orgs, and top users. I do want to caveat this. What is top? What does that mean? One, there's no money at stake here. This is not like the Emmys where people get fame and recognition off of the WebRTCHacks repo. But I do give a lot of thought into what is the most popular trending repo. I have had complaints in the past, like how come I wasn't included, that sort of thing. So I've given a lot of thought, and I actually did some updates just for this year. This updated methodology doesn't represent the charts I just showed because it covers a longer period, and I wanted to keep the methodology consistent in trying to figure out who was the most popular repo or the one with the most contributors. I use this new methodology. One, I include some new events or different events that didn't exist originally in GitHub. I think that's a small thing. But the second thing that's more relevant, because I am looking at keywords, and if you consider someone like WebRTC RS, right? The repo is called WebRTC. So I'm looking for keywords. They have a huge benefit because every time they reference the repo, every commit gets included. Someone like AIORTC, I don't include RTC because it's a common acronym that gives a lot of false positives. They would be undercounted. So I've tweaked the methodology to give more weight to WebRTC repos, even if they don't have WebRTC or other keyword names. With that, I'm going to switch to screen share because it would take too long to copy and paste all the graphs. Looks like I lost my screen share. So let me do that quick. What do you consider a top repo?
I think there would be two of them. The first one would be the ones that are pure WebRTC, but then there would be the ones that are very popular and just do a bit of WebRTC.
I kind of have both here.
You'll need to zoom in.
Okay, too small?
Yep.
Too small. All right. So what I did here, I actually include several different metrics. One, I have a weighted metric. In this case, I'm looking at pure WebRTC keywords. And then I weighted the non-WebRTC commits or contributors, but multiplied that by the percentage of WebRTC events out of all events. And I include all three numbers. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because I wanted to have some notes that can help write up the blog post. So talking through it sometimes is helpful, but I do plan on publishing all this. You can see here, I don't have time to go through all 50, but you can see some big names here, right? Things like Rocket Chat. Do you consider that WebRTC repo? It is related. Do we usually talk about that?
Usually not.
Yes and no. That includes WebRTC. Yeah.
But that as much as the extent that we would give it in terms of, an open source GitHub project on doing WebRTC.
So things like Home Assistant, which I was super surprised. That's 20,000 contributors in 2024. That's insane. It's an open source home automation project, right? It's massive. And there are 251 unique contributors who did something WebRTC related, which involves a lot of video camera stuff. So it's not surprising. Then how do you count that? Home Assistant isn't a pure WebRTC repo, but it has a lot of WebRTC in it. So anyway, that's why I played around with this methodology. I'm curious feedback on it.
It's interesting because it is even above things like Jitsi.
Well, I'll say in the past, Jitsi is another case where, Jitsi, like we always think of them. They certainly have published plenty of posts on WebRTCHacks and talked at our events. We think of them as a WebRTC company. They were one of the first, but Jitsi it's not a WebRTC term. In my older methodology, sometimes they got undercounted. And you can see here, even though Jitsi has 208 contributors who had a keyword in it, they had an overall of 687 contributors. And this is just a Jitsi meet repo. I'll show the orgs in a second. So if I found these interesting, Flutter, big project, another Home Assistant related project. You'll see this throughout some of the other data for these media proxy type services for streaming. There are also a bunch of remote desktop management type apps. The old standby coder is in here too. I won't spend forever, but I'll jump down. That's by contributor, someone who contributed either code or written an issue. We can also look based on popularity events. And these ones are a little bit easier, right? Because basically somebody clicks star on the repo. I also include watch events or somebody's forking it if they care about the repo, if they're doing one of those things. A little bit different, right? We still see live, Rocket Chat. But number one here is LiveKit. The LiveKit thing is probably largely because of their OpenAI ChatGPT.
It was last year for LiveKit.
That actually would be, that's a good question. I don't have that data handy, and I'm not going to.
Because that was before the AI stuff.
Yeah. They were, all, from what I recall, in the list before, but not number one. Certainly not number one here. And you can see some of the other same ones. Pion, so it's much stronger here than in the previous list. Jitsi. There's another media proxy. I think we talked about that. So is NVR, another kind of home camera streaming service, more home assistant stuff in here. And we're going to go take a look on a per org level. And we'll quick back to the orgs here. And this is top orgs again by contributors. Same sort of weighting methodology you can see here. And see here, I didn't go through and clean up all these descriptions. I asked ChatGPT to help. They're not all great, but you can see here similar type of stuff. But I was actually surprised to have this NetCloud.
Go to the first place. Yep.
So yeah, that's another kind of home.
I think it's just an on-prem service for enterprises.
Yeah.
Or office type stuff.
But the description here is more of an enterprise IT thing. All right, this one, Bob, I usually excluded the AdGuard stuff explicitly. I'm surprised it showed up. One of the things I did is if there were no new code contributions, you don't get counted at all. In this case, I'm looking at the whole org, and they have sub repos. Some people did stuff in a bunch of those repos. A lot of them did. They show up. Again, Rocket Chat, Home Assistant, the CL Media Kit, we didn't talk about them. I don't think there's any major surprises here. You start to see some of the other big companies also in here. AWS shows up, Microsoft a little bit further down the list. You see like Electron in there. Big Blue Button is another one with a big community that includes some WebRTC. It's not mostly WebRTC, I'd say, but WebRTC adjacent repo in there. And then we'll just take a quick look at the popularity. And again, it's a very similar story as to what I showed on the top repos out there with people clicking on the popularity. So any big surprises for you in here?
WebTorrent is here.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Elixir, Meet Echo. Yeah. OBS, I would say that's the big one.
All right. So the next area I looked at, because we're looking at keywords. I'm always very curious, as I know you are, Tsahi, as to the intersection of WebRTC plus other things. Which of these interests you most? Maybe before we dive into the stuff, while we're waiting for people to enter.
That's a great question. For me, interest most would be 1 and 3.
Okay. AI, ML, and
the media over QUIC and stuff.
Okay.
AR, MR, XR, we've been talking about it for the last 10 years. Interesting. WHIP and WHEP are just too simple. It's like, okay, so we have signaling, it's obvious or really, really quick to achieve. So why?
All right, let's talk about WHIP first. To save some time, I do have some updated figures in Excel, but I won't jump back and forth. You can see the WHIP and WHEP included. They're fairly distinct names, easy to separate. The system, decent growth, not an insane height. It's still a relatively small community doing it. Here's some analysis I did. This looks through July, covering the top repos by popularity. You can see all the broadcast streaming-related companies are in there. I'll talk a little more about XR, which is this MetaHuman stream thing. I think is kind of interesting. The community of broadcasters doing this. Next, we'll look at WebCodecs, Web Transport, kind of the media over QUIC type stuff. That's promising to, potentially move stuff off of WebRTC and do it more yourself. And this one also, you see, there is a pretty clearly a slight uptick of just WebCodecs in here. What kind of not as obvious is basically the WebCodecs plus WebRTC. Actually, I was expected maybe there'd be more there, but I mean, it's not completely flat, but it's not this is 2 or 3, right? These are very small numbers, so there's not a whole lot going on here.
The issue is the numbers; they're not interesting.
Exactly. I was surprised it's a lot slower, a lot lower than I thought. So I also took a look specifically at QUIC, media over QUIC, and web transport. The numbers here aren't too bad, right? We're getting up to like 160 repos here. This is actually a little more interesting. And I did take a snapshot of some of the repos a lot in 2024. They're doing some stuff here. Yeah, I think some potential there. Still not a ton. Here's a new one I just did. I realized I forgot it, which is looking at XR. I don't know what you call it. That sort of thing. This one actually has had a pretty steady growth. And it is another case where I explicitly looked for WebRTC. You can see my insane regular expression that I'm running against all the queries to get this right. This actually had some decent growth, right? So I think this could be interesting. All right. With all the stuff that Apple and Meta are doing here, you can see some. I didn't include the snapshot of the companies. I forgot to paste that slide in, but there are a handful of companies outside of, I mean, there's a lot of WebKit stuff happening related to this. Not a big surprise with what Apple's doing, but there are other companies doing XR related things that include a heavy streaming part or real-time communications as part of that. All right. And lastly, AI and ML. I got to reuse our old Cranky logo. I looked for AI plus Weber. This is what shows up. In addition to analyzing GitHub, previously I've done analysis looking at Stack Overflow. I didn't do more of that this time because they haven't published updates to Stack Overflow. The data on BigQuery is pretty old now. So I actually went and built my own database of this stuff by downloading it off of the HTTP archive, but it hasn't been updated since April. I didn't spend a lot of time on this. You can see here, it's kind of like, I thought there'd be a lot more WebRTC plus AI ML on Stack Overflow.
Probably OpenAI.
Yeah, not really a tie. And the OpenAI was one of the terms in there. I thought I had a slide. I could jump to another one, but since we're running out of time, the GitHub data shows something similar, right? It's not nothing out there, but it's actually not as much as you think. To wrap things up, I do want to give a chance for some audience questions. My conclusions, and you can tell me what you think after this short presentation and all your ongoing analyst work. But I think WebRTC actually doing pretty well, right? Certainly had a kind of sugar high off of the pandemic, but there's still some new peaks in terms of developers, people understanding WebRTC. Still plenty of activity, still new stuff going on. The new tech is still pretty small compared to the traditional WebRTC stuff that we've been working with a long time. Media over QUIC is not replacing WebRTC today. I know you've talked about that in your blogs too, right? There's no data to support that.
And did they write about that? Because I know that they're written about that's for January when I'm doing the trends for 2020.
I don't know. I might be thinking of some of the insights, comments, and stuff like that in there. Okay. And then the last one, I really want there to be more ML and WebRTC, and I didn't see it. I'll say we know there are some companies doing stuff, but this is again public repo. So if somebody's doing this stuff and it's a private repo, or it's not on GitHub, it's not going to show up in my data set.
So I think that media will take a long time. It's not that quick. And then the ML stuff is done behind closed, not in open source. That would be my conclusion on these things.
I agree. And unlike other areas where you see copycats in open source trying to replicate some of the closed source stuff, there's not as much of that in ML.
I have a question around the methodology itself. You did that in the last couple of years. What do you plan or think that you should change or improve for next year? Where do you see gaps in the way that you do the analysis today?
Well, I'd like to do more of like the 2024 analysis I did, like update that just in general. I said, ideally, I would go and rerun the analysis every year, but it's actually getting pretty expensive. I mean, probably just like the updates I did in the last couple of days probably cost me like $75 or something like that. It would be hundreds of dollars every time I go and rebuild the data set from scratch. And unfortunately, I realized I screw up stuff, or like there's little tweaks that you want to make every time. So like you got to assume like every time I run it, probably need to do it a few times. So it starts to get expensive. So, but yeah, I'd like to go back and probably not from the very beginning because that's not practical, but at least maybe rebuild the data set for the last, since the pandemic, say, right? And kind of start kind of with a clean data set with all the new repos, and then include the larger expanded list of not just the pure events that have WebRTC terms in them, but basically everything that happens in those repos. That actually might change some things. The keyword analysis is still based on those keywords, so it's not going to change anything there. But in terms of the overall trend and activity and users, it's possible that could change.
Okay.
Maybe with that. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. Sorry, it was good to hang out again. I miss the old Cranky Geek days, but this is maybe the next best thing that we get. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll be in touch. Talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
All right. See you.